The drill bit shrieked as it met unexpected resistance. For weeks, the excavation team had been carving through the earth beneath Los Angeles, expanding the city's subway system. But now, nearly 500 feet below the surface, their machines had struck something ancient. Dr. Isaac Holloway felt the vibration through his boots before the comms flared to life. Doc? You might want to get down here." Isaac adjusted his hard hat and exchanged a wary glance with Mara Klein, his lead researcher. She had the sharp, analytical mind of a linguist, but the instincts of a skeptic, an invaluable trait when dealing with the unknown. Minutes later, they stood at the excavation site's lowest level, surrounded by floodlights and dust-choked air. Before them stretched a vast, smooth surface, black as obsidian, but seemingly untouched by time. The construction foreman, a grizzled man named Ray Calloway, tapped it with a wrench. "Not rock," he muttered. "Something else?" Isaac crouched, running his gloved fingers along the surface. It wasn't just smooth, it was impossibly seamless. No cracks, no chisel marks, nothing. A cold unease settled in his chest. "This isn't natural," Mara murmured. "No," Isaac agreed. "And it's not supposed to be here." The next few hours passed in a blur of dust and urgency. Specialized equipment was brought in, ground-penetrating radar scanning the anomaly. What the data revealed sent a ripple of disbelief through the team. This wasn't just a wall. It was a structure. More careful excavation revealed an entrance, an arched doorway buried beneath centuries of sediment. The moment the last layer of rock was brushed away, a gust of stale air exhaled from within, carrying with it a scent unlike anything they had encountered before. Not decay, not sulfur, something older. They breached the doorway with slow, methodical precision, stepping into a corridor that stretched beyond the range of their floodlights. The walls, now fully exposed, were lined with unfamiliar inscriptions. Strange symbols spiraled in meticulous patterns, their meaning elusive yet disturbingly purposeful. Mara traced a gloved hand over the engravings. They don't match any known linguistic structure. She turned to Isaac, eyes alight with both curiosity and hesitation. "It's not even proto-language. It's something else entirely." Ray exhaled sharply. "Hell of a lot older than it should be. That's for sure." Isaac's mind raced. The oldest human settlements in North America barely stretch back 15,000 years. This? The depth alone suggested millennia beyond that. They ventured further. The passage sloped downward at an unnatural angle, as if designed to lead them towards something. The further they went, the more oppressive the air became, thick with an unplaceable tension, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Then came the statues. They lined the corridor at irregular intervals, tall, humanoid figures carved from the same dark stone as the walls. Their features were elongated, stretched into expressions of anguish. Some clutched at their own faces, others seemed frozen mid-scream. Mara swallowed. This is an artistic expression. It's a warning. A shudder passed through the team as they pressed on. Soon, the passage widened into a cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. And at its center stood the monolith. It loomed at nearly 20 feet tall, pulsing faintly with an internal, rhythmic glow. The same indecipherable symbols from the walls covered its surface, but these seemed different, alive, shifting ever so slightly when unobserved. Isaac felt an inexplicable pull, a whisper at the edges of his consciousness. He stepped forward. "Dr. Holloway." Mara's voice was tight with unease. "Something's wrong." He blinked, tearing his gaze away. The sensation vanished, leaving behind a hollow sense of longing. A crackling voice broke through their radios. Doc? We're getting some weird readings up top." Isaac pressed his earpiece. "Define weird." "Electromagnetic spikes. Something's messing with the instruments. You might want to wrap it up down there." Mara gave him a meaningful look. "This place doesn't want us here." Isaac exhaled slowly, nodding. "Let's document what we can and get out." As they turned to leave, a distant noise echoed through the chamber, a faint, dragging sound, like stone grating against stone. The team froze. Ray swung his flashlight toward the statues. One was missing. The corridor behind them stretched into consuming blackness. The floodlights flickered, casting fractured shadows that shouldn't have been moving. Something shifted in the dark. A whisper, just at the edge of hearing. Isaac swallowed against the sudden weight pressing against his ribs. Go! Now! They moved quickly, resisting the urge to run. Every step sent adrenaline screaming through their veins. The passage seemed longer than before, the statues, no, the things, looming closer. One of them was no longer stone. It watched. By the time they reached the surface, Isaac's hands were shaking. The sight felt different now. The air wrong. Something had woken up, and it had noticed them. The government moved fast. Within 24 hours of Isaac Holloway's report, the excavation site was swarmed with black-clad agents and researchers operating under the Department of Energy. The official story, at least for the press, was that an underground gas pocket had forced a temporary shutdown of the subway expansion. The truth was locked behind steel barricades and armed guards. Isaac had expected to be pushed aside, his team relegated to footnotes in whatever classified report these people planned to write. Instead, he found himself and Mara Klein standing before a man whose very presence exuded quiet authority. Dr. Holloway, the man greeted, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his expression unreadable. Agent Grayson, we need your expertise. Isaac hesitated. You already seem to have plenty of your own experts, none who specialize in unearthing the impossible. Grayson's tone left no room for argument. The message was clear. The ruins were dangerous. But instead of sealing them off, they wanted to go deeper. The next day, a 10-person expedition descended into the ruins, armed with cutting-edge technology and guns. The armed presence did little to settle Isaac's nerves. If the entity or entities within these ruins were real, bullets wouldn't matter. The first corridor remained unchanged, smooth black walls lined with shifting symbols. The statues, however, had moved. Subtly, they were positioned just slightly differently than before, as if they'd watched the team leave and then resumed their previous stance. No one spoke of it. The passage sloped downward, leading them into uncharted depths. The walls seemed to absorb light, stretching shadows unnaturally far. The further they went, the more wrong the architecture became. Angles refused to align. Hallways subtly twisted, turning upon themselves in ways that made the human brain ache. This isn't just old, Mara murmured, sweeping her flashlight across the shifting symbols. This is pre-human, maybe even pre-terrestrial. Agent Grayson gave her a sharp look. Explain? Mara hesitated. Linguistics evolve over time, but there are always traceable patterns. This? It doesn't fit any known evolution. It's like someone or something created a language fully formed, with no ancestral development. Isaac shivered, like it wasn't made for us to understand. Or, Mara added grimly, like it was designed to change the people who read it. They pressed on. An hour into their descent, the walls widened into an enormous chamber. At its center stood a massive, pulsing obelisk, taller than anything they'd encountered before. Its black surface was covered in the same symbols, but these were different. More aggressive, jagged lines cutting into the stone like scars. This is the heart of the ruins, Isaac whispered. The team fanned out, examining the chamber. Their radio signals crackled with interference. The air vibrated with a low, almost imperceptible hum, setting Isaac's teeth on edge. Then someone screamed. The group spun toward the sound. Ethan Reyes, one of the researchers, had been standing at the chamber's edge moments ago. Now he was gone. His flashlight lay on the ground, still shining. Isaac's pulse thundered. Reyes? Silence. Then, from the radio, static. Faint, rasping breaths. Ethan's breathing. He was still transmitting, but he was nowhere in sight. One of the security officers, a broad-shouldered man named Langford, took a cautious step toward the spot where Reyes had stood. His flashlight flickered as if something unseen passed between him and the beam. And then came the whispering. It rose from the walls, from the floor, from the obelisk itself. A dozen voices speaking in unison, a language that curled around the mind like tendrils of oil. Mara gasped. They're not just speaking. They're calling. A deep, resonant sound pulsed from the obelisk. The statues at the chamber's edge twitched. Isaac grabbed Mara's arm. We need to go. Now. Agent Grayson didn't argue. He signaled to the others, but the way back was not as they had left it. The tunnel was wider, deeper, the angles more distorted, and there were more statues. They hadn't seen them enter, hadn't seen them arrive, but now they lined the walls, twisted in agonized poses, their carved eyes weeping dark streaks of something not quite stone. One of them moved, not a trick of the light, not the warping of shadows. It stepped forward, its form shifting between solid and something much worse, something fluid, writhing beneath its stone shell. Langford fired first. The sound of gunfire shattered the silence. Bullet impacts sent cracks through the creature's surface, but instead of shattering, it bled. A dark, viscous fluid seeped from the fractures, and the thing smiled. Isaac had seen fear in men before. He had never seen terror like what crossed Langford's face. Then, in the space between seconds, the creature was behind him. Langford's scream cut short. The statues closed in. Isaac turned and ran. The surviving team fled. The corridors twisted, rearranging themselves as they moved, forcing them to navigate a shifting maze designed to trap them forever. Mara stumbled. Isaac caught her, dragging her forward. The whispering grew louder, bleeding into their thoughts. Agent Grayson fired his weapon into the dark, his expression grim. We're sealing this place? Isaac's mind raced. The ruins weren't just a burial site. They weren't a forgotten civilization's remnants. They were a prison, and they had broken the lock. Mara gasped, eyes flicking between the shifting symbols on the walls. There's a way to close it again, but someone has to stay behind. No one spoke. Langford was gone. Reyes was gone. It was down to Isaac, Mara, Grayson, and 2 other security officers. Grayson exhaled, his decision already made. Get to the surface. No, Mara protested. Grayson shook his head. This was a mistake that dies with me. Before anyone could argue, he turned and ran toward the monolith, toward the heart of whatever was waking up. The whispering screamed. Isaac grabbed Mara and ran. They reached the surface as the first tremors hit. The ground quaked, sending up clouds of dust as the ruins below collapsed. The final transmission from Grayson's radio was lost in the static. It was over, or so they thought. Isaac stood at the edge of the barricaded site, watching the dust settle. We shouldn't have come here, Mara whispered. No, Isaac agreed. The wind carried a faint, almost imperceptible sound, laughter. The ruins were buried, the entrance sealed, but something had left with them, something that could not be buried, something that had waited, and now it was free. I'll construct Section 3 with a compelling, eerie narrative that deepens the horror and advances the plot toward its chilling conclusion. Expect a structured build-up of tension, vivid descriptions, and an unsettling realization that what was unearthed did not stay buried. I'll get started now. The ruins had collapsed, but the nightmares had only begun. Isaac Holloway lay awake in his motel room, staring at the ceiling. It had been 3 days since the expedition ended in catastrophe, since Agent Grayson had sacrificed himself to seal the ruins beneath Los Angeles. The official story was simple. A seismic event had destabilized the excavation site, and the project was indefinitely suspended. The government had scrubbed everything clean, but they couldn't erase what was in his head. He hadn't slept. Not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back down there, wandering the shifting corridors, the symbols slithering beneath his fingertips, the statues watching. And always, at the end of the dream, something waited in the dark. His phone buzzed. A message from Mara. Meet me. Now. The 24-hour diner Mara had chosen was nearly empty. She sat in the farthest booth, eyes sunken, fingers absently tracing symbols into the condensation on her glass. Isaac slid in across from her. You look like hell, she murmured. Isaac huffed. You're one to talk. She pushed a file across the table. You need to see this. He opened it. Photographs. The body of one of the surviving security officers, Langford's replacement. His corpse was twisted unnaturally, as if every joint had been pulled apart and reassembled. His mouth was open, lips stretched into an obscene grin, and his eyes. They had turned completely black. Isaac swallowed hard. Where did this happen? His apartment, Mara whispered. Found 2 nights ago. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Isaac turned the next photograph over. A crime scene image, walls smeared in something dark. Words were scratched into the plaster. It followed US. A chill slid down Isaac's spine. There's more, Mara said, voice barely audible. The surveillance footage from outside his building? There's a frame, just one, where there's someone else in the room with him. Isaac hesitated. Someone? Mara shook her head. It's not human. She pulled out her laptop, bringing up the footage. The video was grainy, but Isaac could make out Langford's replacement pacing his apartment, rubbing at his temples as if in pain. Then, in a single corrupted frame, it appeared. A figure, elongated just slightly wrong, stood in the corner of the room. Its body was wrapped in shifting shadows, its face blurred, yet somehow unmistakably familiar. Isaac's stomach turned. The statues, he breathed. Mara nodded grimly. It got out. They left the diner with a singular, unspoken understanding. They weren't safe. Something had come back with them. It moved through the city unseen, leaving no footprints, no trace, only the unmistakable feeling of being watched. They had disturbed a prison, and now the warden had followed them to the surface. As they walked through the empty streets, Isaac's paranoia sharpened. The streetlights flickered, the shadows stretched just a little too far, and in the distance, past the glow of neon signs, he swore he saw a figure standing perfectly still, its face just out of sight. We need to get off the streets, Mara whispered. They ducked into a motel, checking into a room with shaky hands. Isaac bolted the door. Okay, he exhaled, trying to suppress the mounting panic. We need a plan. Mara sat on the bed, head in her hands. I don't think we can run from it. Isaac frowned. You're saying we let it come to us? She looked up, dark circles under her eyes. I think it already has. Then, from outside the door, came the whispering. The whispers weren't in English. They weren't in any language meant for human ears. It slithered through the cracks in the door, soaked into the wallpaper, curled beneath their skin. Isaac's breath hitched. Slowly, he turned his head toward the peephole. Mara grabbed his wrist. Don't! Too late. For a fraction of a second, he saw it. Tall. Unnaturally tall. Its limbs were elongated, its skin the same obsidian hue as the ruins. The symbols, those ever-shifting, unreadable symbols, covered its body, moving like a living language. And where its eyes should have been, only darkness. The thing smiled. Isaac reeled back, heart hammering. It's here. The door rattled. Not from force, but something worse, something curious. A hand-like impression pressed against the wood, fingers too long, too sharp. Then, just as suddenly it stopped, the whispers faded. The presence receded. Mara was shaking. It's playing with us? Isaac clenched his fists. Then we need to stop playing. They spent the next day preparing. Through frantic research and fragmented memories of the ruins, Mara pieced together a theory. If the entity was a warden, then it was bound to certain rules. The monolith in the ruins had acted as both a key and a lock. And now, that lock was broken. We need to find the artifact, she muttered, pacing the room. The one you found in your pack after the collapse. The government took it. Isaac's stomach turned. You want to break into a classified facility? She looked at him. Do you want to die screaming? Fair point. The facility was heavily guarded, but desperation bred recklessness. Under the cover of night, they slipped past security, moving through sterile corridors that smelled of bureaucracy and concealed truths. Isaac located the artifact in a glass containment case. Even behind thick layers of reinforced material, it hummed. Mara exhaled. That's it. The moment they lifted it from its case, the lights flickered. A voice, no, a presence, filled the room. You should not have returned. The temperature plummeted. The glass in the room fractured. Shadows twisted in the corners, coalescing into a shape. Isaac grabbed the artifact and ran. They made it to the rooftop. The city stretched below them, oblivious, unaware of the nightmare unraveling just beyond its periphery. Mara clutched the artifact, her breath ragged. "We need to destroy it." Isaac hesitated. "And if that makes things worse?" The entity emerged. It stepped through the rooftop door as if bleeding through reality itself. Its form shifted, momentarily resembling Grayson, then Langford, then Reyes. A cruel mockery of the dead. It reached toward them. Mara screamed and slammed the artifact to the ground. The air shattered. The city lights dimmed. The entity let out a sound, a shriek not meant for human ears, something that sent Isaac to his knees, clutching his skull. And then, just like that, it was gone. The morning came like a distant dream. They sat on the rooftop, exhausted, staring at the fragmented remains of the artifact. The city carried on as if nothing had happened, as if an ancient horror hadn't just tried to reclaim its dominion. Mara turned to Isaac. "Did we win?" Isaac swallowed. "I don't know." She exhaled, watching the horizon. "Then we should leave before we find out." They walked away from the rooftop, from the ruins, from the past they had unearthed. But even as they vanished into the waking world, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling. Something had changed, and somewhere in the shadows, it was still watching. I'll craft Section 4 with a gripping, chilling conclusion that ties together the horror, suspense, and existential dread of the story. Expect a lingering sense of unease, a final revelation, and an ending that is both satisfying and deeply unsettling. I'll begin. Isaac Holloway had never believed in ghosts. He had spent his career unearthing ancient tombs, forgotten structures, and remnants of civilizations lost to time. He had seen the fingerprints of history, but never the hand that had left them. Until now, it had been 1 month since the ruins collapsed. 1 month since he and Mara had destroyed the artifact. 1 month since the thing that had followed them from the depths had vanished. They had walked away, left Los Angeles, cut ties with everything, and yet it was not over. Isaac knew this the moment he woke up to find the symbols carved into his bedroom ceiling. He sat up in bed, breath heavy, sweat clinging to his skin. The room was dark, the symbols barely visible in the moonlight. But he knew them, knew their shifting fluid forms. They had been in the ruins. They had been on the monolith. They had been on its skin. Isaac clenched his fists. No, he wasn't dreaming. He wasn't hallucinating. It was still here. A notification lit up his phone. "Mara, it's happening again." Isaac barely remembered getting dressed, barely remembered the drive across town. He found Mara at a rundown motel, pacing, chain-smoking. The moment she saw him, she yanked up her sleeve. Isaac's stomach turned to ice. The symbols were on her skin. They weren't drawn. They weren't tattooed. They were growing, etched like scar tissue, as if something beneath her flesh was trying to write its way out. Mara's voice was hoarse. "We didn't destroy it." Isaac sat down hard on the bed. "I know." She exhaled shakily. "Then what the hell do we do now?" They spent the next day hunting for answers. Libraries, university records, old folklore databases. Mara hacked into government archives, searching for any mention of similar findings. And they found something. It wasn't in a database. It wasn't in a classified file. It was a newspaper article from 1897. Isaac read it twice, then a third time. The words were written in the old, florid style of the time, but the meaning was clear. Miners vanishing beneath Los Angeles. Deep tunnels discovered. Statues found. Then, at the very end of the article, a chilling footnote. It was decided that the passage should be sealed, for some things must remain buried. Mara whispered. They tried to cover it up even back then. Isaac's pulse pounded. And now, we've undone what they tried to contain. That night, the city changed. Streetlights flickered. Shadows stretched in ways they shouldn't. The air was heavy, thick with an electric charge. Isaac and Mara walked quickly, watching, waiting. Then they saw them. Figures. Tall, elongated, wrong. They stood at the edges of street corners, just past the glow of neon signs. Watching, waiting. And when Isaac blinked, they were closer. He grabbed Mara's wrist. "Run." They sprinted through the streets. weaving through alleys, their breath ragged. The figures did not chase. They did not lunge. They simply moved closer every time Isaac looked away. Mara gasped. The ruins weren't just a prison. Isaac's mind raced. Then what were they? She swallowed hard. A doorway, and they had opened it. There was only one option left. They had to go back. The excavation site was sealed, but Mara had access to the old schematics. There was another entrance, an abandoned storm drain leading to the tunnels. It was past midnight when they arrived. The storm drain gaped before them like the mouth of something ancient, waiting to swallow them whole. Mara hesitated. Once we go in, we might not come back. Isaac nodded. Then let's make it count. They descended. The tunnels were different now. Darker, warmer, alive. The walls breathed, their surfaces subtly shifting as if something massive slumbered beneath them. And the statues were waiting. Hundreds of them. Isaac's throat tightened. They had been motionless before. Now they stood in a circle, as if anticipating their return. Mara shuddered. It knows we're here. Isaac stepped forward. The symbols along the walls pulsed, recognizing him, greeting him. A whisper curled around his ear. You have seen. You have spoken. You cannot leave. His vision blurred. The air rippled. And then, at the very center of the chamber, something opened its eyes. It was never a statue. It had been waiting, watching. The being rose, taller than anything, its form shifting between shapes, between faces. It was everyone and no one. Its mouth did not move, but its voice was inside Isaac's skull. You were chosen to wake us. Mara clutched her head. It's inside my mind. Isaac fought against the weight of its presence. What are you? It smiled. The first, the last, the true form of this world. Isaac felt his sanity unraveling. He understood now. The ruins weren't buried history. They were the original city. Los Angeles had been built on top of something else. Something older. Something waiting to reclaim itself. Mara's voice was distant. Isaac, we're not going to survive this. His grip tightened. We don't have to. We just have to close the door. She nodded. Then let's finish this. They had one chance. The monolith in the ruins had been the key before, and its shattered remains still pulsed with power. Mara sprinted toward it, dragging her knife across her palm, smearing blood onto the surface. The symbols reacted, flaring to life. The entity howled. Isaac grabbed the broken pieces of the monolith, jamming them together, forcing the connection. The ground shook. The air screamed. The statues collapsed. The entity lunged forward, and then, with a final, gut-wrenching pulse, the ruins imploded. Everything went dark. Isaac woke up to sunlight. He was lying on the ground, dust coating his skin. Mara groaned beside him, coughing. The ruins were gone. Not just buried, erased. The tunnels were collapsed, the monolith destroyed, the symbols faded to nothing. And the city? Unchanged. People walked the streets as if nothing had happened, as if the nightmare beneath their feet had never existed. Mara exhaled shakily. Did we do it? Isaac looked around, heart pounding. There were no statues, no figures, no whispers. But he wasn't sure, because as they left the site, blending back into the world above, Isaac saw one last symbol carved into the pavement. It was fresh, and it was still moving,